Okay, so the first time I tried to make off-world ship generation take into account the rectangular segments that are going to be used for the interior generation, it went horribly wrong to the point of just wasting my whole day. I just had to undo everything I'd done that entire day and go back to a previous version. And when I did go back to a previous version, my next attempt, I obviously was keen to avoid that happening again, and so I went for a much less drastic tinkering with the existing algorithm and just tried to sort of gently tweak the existing algorithm into behaving nicely with the other algorithm. And that worked, and then I moved on to Sovereign, which are kind of similar in that they're both Sovereign and Off-World fly at 45 degrees. Off-World are kind of V-shaped like that, Sovereign are like jagged diamonds. Let's see if I can fit that on screen, like that. And for each faction is a unique challenge for this. This is one of those things where there's no neat little trick you can universalize. In fact, basically the substance of the job I'm doing is to make the algorithm that is general be specific in each case. And because each one is aesthetically different, they all need their own different solutions. So for each one, I fire it up, I look at how the segments are currently filling that space, and I see what's wrong with that, and I see if I can sort of visualize an algorithmic way to fix it. And with Sovereign, their shapes do suit a rectangular approach, because they are just sort of rotated squares really, but they're overlapping squares, and zones can't really overlap. Like at some point you've got to put a boundary between them. So you know, every module has to be in one zone or the other, it can't be in both, because the whole point is they're security levels, and if this is a security 1 zone, you must need a security 1 keycard to get there, otherwise the logic of the keycard system doesn't work. And I tried something, the simple thing I was trying to do was divide it diagonally, so that they're not, they fit within a rectangle, but each one would be kind of a jagged stair-step type shape. And as long as the sort of diagonal extent of it was not so big that the bounding rectangle was too big to fit on screen, it would be kind of okay. Like it wouldn't be the most efficient use of your screen space, but it would work. The trouble was it's very hard to sort of guarantee that none of those segments will be, if one of those segments is like too thin, because it's the last one and there's not enough ship left, then you've got a series of modules that are only connected diagonally, which means they're not connected to each other, which means you can't get from one to the other, which means it's no good as a security zone, because if you enter in this one and then the key card's in that one, you can never get to it. And that's not an impossible problem to fix, but looking at it, I was trying to think, like, can I just, I'm happy to change the ship shape a little bit to suit this, and really, like, this idea of randomly generating one of those and then trying to reverse engineer how you fit zones into it really feels clunky and awkward. So I decided, look, the ship shape generation has just got to bear in mind the size of the sectors. It's got to know that, the size of the segments. And I couldn't talk myself out of doing basically what I did last time. I went back to paper and I designed a load of Sovereign type ships and how they would. I've actually got that. No, I don't. Must be upstairs. Sovereign type ships and how they would break into rectangular zones, and I pretty quickly hit upon an interesting kind of formula for them, which would generate shapes that are much like the ones I currently have, which I really like, but also ensure that the interior broke into not just a series of rectangles, but a series of rectangles in which the kind of main thread of them are diagonally adjacent to each other. And that's nice, but joined on by other ones as well. So there's like a kind of diagonal row, and there's ones either side of the sort of indented bits. That's nice because it means there's a lot of boundaries. It means to get from, you know, if you're doing the diagonal ones like this and then like that, to get from zone 1 to zone 2, you have to go through another zone, and that's a lot of zones. A lot of zones means more kind of substance to the logic of getting through the ship. And so it's going to involve, to make that, I've got to just have an algorithm that can just make a block of modules, just like make a 3x3 block of modules here, make a 3x3 block of modules there, make a 3x3 block of modules there. And that is a big part of what was going so wrong before. And I just can't I can't convince myself that you shouldn't also make the segment when you do that. It's so obvious. You're making these 3x3 modules. You know for sure all of them are going to be in the same segment, and everything that isn't in those 3x3 modules is going to be in a different segment. Make the segment right then and there. And so I basically did the same thing that I was trying to do with Offworld that went so badly wrong. I just decided I'm just going to try it. This is just the right way to do it. I just have to figure out a way to do it. So I just did it. Very, very, very slowly, like step by step, and after each step tested it as best I could. And what I was kind of doing Offworld was like I would try and run it, run my algorithm, and it would crash. And it would crash because some later part of the ship generation code didn't have the information it needed to progress. And that could be for any number of reasons, and so I would just disable that bit of code and then say, okay, now can you run? And then now can you run? Now can you run? And then eventually I'd end up at this, yes, I can run, but I've made a ship full of modules that think they have no adjacent modules and therefore all use exterior fringes all the way around. The interior had it just had one room and no other thing connected to it. Nothing could see any way to build an interior. And that was mystifying. I thought, like, once I can see it, this will make the problem clear, but it didn't make the problem clear. So this time, when I write the algorithm and it says, oh, this later bit of code that's trying to place clusters of guards is unable to run now, I would just say, why? When you say this module doesn't exist, can you tell me, like, what reference are you checking when you say it doesn't exist? Is it a null object, or is it an object that did exist but then was destroyed? And things like that. And it would be pointless to go into specifics because there are, first time I did this there was probably over 100 different crashes. This time there was probably 25 or something. And each one would be, 10, 15 minutes of fixing. And then it would be fixed and then move on to the next crash. And I was also being less ambitious, so initially I wasn't trying to, I decided, I kind of broke it down to a whole set of different problems. So one is, if we assign segments at the same time that we create the ship shape, we are now doing the segment stuff a little bit earlier in the process than we normally would, because there's a bunch of stuff that has to happen after the ship shape is generated, and that's things like figuring out where the bridge goes and where the turrets go and where the thrusters go. And that used to always happen before it was divided into segments, and if I want to do ship and segment generation simultaneously, now segment generation happens before those manual placements. And so one of the things I tried was let's just move the old segment division code that doesn't crash ahead of the manual placements section and see if it crashes, and it does. And so that's interesting, there's a problem with that, just the order is a problem. So I looked into that and I fixed it, and it was to do with, like, when you create one of these bridge modules or a special module, you replace the existing one, but you don't tell the segment that it was in that you've replaced it, and so it's looking for a module that doesn't exist anymore. And then the other type of problem was when you generate this, I couldn't be sure that my code for generating all these different segments in different places, that they were all kind of adding up to the right numbers, that they would always fill the shape of the ship, that they would always not overlap with each other. So I started by just saying, make it all one big segment that fills the ship exactly. It goes from the first row to the last row, the first column to the last column, just a giant square. And to avoid that kind of problem. And I also did not actually create a segment. I decided, like, for one thing, let's just leave the old segment division code in there, and you just see if you can get that square working. And basically, after a day of work, I'm fixing all these crashes and all the individual problems, all these individual aspects of this solution. I eventually got it to, yes, generate just a big square. And I even, once that worked, I then sort of retrofitted the new segment code and said, okay, that works now, like the basic sort of idea of generating a square and then dividing into segments and then doing manual placements all works. Can I please change that segment division code to be my own thing? And I'm not going to do the fancy thing yet, I'm just going to say all of it is one segment, just make everything one segment. And I did tried putting that in, taking the old code out, and I think there probably were a couple of crashes with it, but then I fixed those, and now it does do it. So the subtotal of my work yesterday was basically I make a big square, and it's all one segment. It's the simplest possible thing, but it works, and this is in a very trivial and what's the mathematical term for it? Degenerate way. It's the most trivial case, to the point that isn't even really interesting. This is the new system. I literally, instead of being this kind of loop where I would go through each column and each row and decide a starting column and a finishing column, and then like fill those, and then check certain things within that loop to decide whether to replace a module or not. That's how all the old code works, all the old shape generation code works. Now I say, create a segment with modules, and then in brackets the starting and finishing rows and columns of that module, and it does it. So the next stage, which I started yesterday, was, okay, now that we can make just one giant trivial square, can I make, let's say, 2 squares? And immediately you hit problems, because if you have, what I want to test is that main sequence of diagonal segments, and testing that's tricky because the game will crash if the 2 segments are not joined to each other, because it will try and fill the space and it will find no route to the rest of the space, and I think that just crashes because it expects to. And I can, change that code to be more robust and cope with that, but I don't ever want that to happen, so should I? So it was very, very encouraging, if slow, but then slightly discouraging right at the end, because I don't know why. What I ended up doing was to avoid that diagonal disconnect problem. I just made an L shape, which is like, top one is this shape, and then the bottom one just fills the whole bottom, and it's that shape, and that still crashed. I don't totally know why. So my first job is to look into that. I haven't really looked yet, so it's not a terrifying crash yet. It's just slightly not the best way to end the day. But at that point I was like, okay, I'm just fucking done. So I think this is my approach to it. I am going to do it the good way. I'm not going to just cheat and hack my way around ever approaching this problem that kicked my ass. I'm going to kick the ass of the problem that kicked my ass, and do it very, very slowly in a very relaxed way. So it's very like experimental. I'm just kind of testing the water, and also when it's brutal, I'm just not going to work that hard. I'm just going to, like, if it gets to 4 PM and I've just had a grueling slog of a day, I'll just stop and I'll play Dishonored 2, because Dishonored 2 is really good.